4 billion people on the planet live in poverty. By that I mean they live on less than an average of $4 a day, less than a Starbucks grande mocha. Why are so many people still so poor? What's it like living in that kind of poverty? Can you die from it? According to UNICEF, 29,000 children die every day from conditions related to poverty. Two of the primary determinants of childhood survival are access to safe drinking water, which 1.1 billion people lack, and access to adequate sanitation. But 2.5 billion people practice open defecation, spreading diarrheal diseases like cholera, typhoid, and intestinal worms that kill a child every 20 seconds. Where does all this human waste go? In urban slums, flying toilets, literally sacks of shit, pose peril to passersby. In rural areas, the fecal matter makes its way into water and food, and the 500 small farms that feed 80% of the world's population and support the subsistence of 2 billion people. But these smallholder farmers lack access to basic financial services like credit and insurance. If their crops fail, they lose everything. They're among 3 billion people who are excluded from current financial systems. Without access to credit, farmers can't invest in things like drip irrigation or fertilizer or refrigeration to store the milk they generate from their cows. But even if they had money to invest, they might not have energy. 1.6 billion people live off the grid, and another 1 billion people have unreliable grid access. At home, people use kerosene for light, but the quality of the light is very poor. Children can't really study at night, and adults can't engage in income-generating activities. What kerosene lanterns lack in lumen output, they make up for in fumes. And along with the 3 billion people who cook on open wood fires, indoor air pollution prematurely takes the lives of 4.3 million people per year, mostly women and children. Cooking on open wood fires and using charcoal increases deforestation, which further reduces agricultural yields. In Haiti, for example, 98% of the country is deforested, and charcoal can account for 50% of a family's daily expenditure. Imagine spending 50% of your income just to cook your food, not even to buy it. So life for the 3 billion cooking on open wood fires and the 4 billion poor is not very good, especially if you're a woman. Poverty is the gender equality issue of our age, and 3 trends could make it worse. First, we'll have 2 billion more people on the planet by 2050. Most of the population growth will take place in Africa and Southeast Asia. So while the rates of poverty may decline, the absolute number of people living in poverty could increase. Second, we're experiencing the largest wave of urban migration in the history of humankind. Already, over half of our global population lives in cities, and by 2030, 5 billion will live in cities. Again, with most of the growth taking place in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Why do people move to cities? They're in search of better jobs, but when they arrive, they find they don't have the skills to get those jobs, and they can't get student loans to get an education for them. So they end up living without the ecosystem services, such as food from the forest, that they would find in rural areas. We may have more people living in a worse kind of poverty. And third, we're on a trajectory to a 4 degrees Celsius increase in global mean surface temperature by the end of the century, far beyond what most scientists consider catastrophic. most of this warming is caused by greenhouse gas emissions from the global north. It fueled our economic development, accruing what Pope Francis calls an ecological debt to the global south. To get to a low emissions scenario would take a radical transformation of our energy systems, carbon neutral or carbon negative, far beyond what is contemplated in the Paris COP21 climate accord. Make no mistake, all of us will suffer from climate change. Raging wildfires that cause whole towns to leave in Canada, massive floods following huge typhoons and storms. But climate change will impact the poor the most. Food insecurity will intensify from drought and heat waves. Ocean acidification and ocean warming is killing our coral reefs, which serve as home to fisheries for the entire planet, depriving the poor of one of the key sources of protein they rely on. Hundreds of millions of people will flee hunger and malnutrition, dwarfing the Syrian refugee crisis by 2 orders of magnitude. So life is pretty bad if you're poor, and it could get a lot worse. And we come back to the question, why are so many people still so poor? What about the paradigm of government-to-government aid, of official development assistance? After all, in 2013, we spent $150 billion helping lift people out of poverty. That sounds like a lot, until you consider that the same year we spent $523 billion for direct and indirect fossil fuel subsidies. We're funding one of the core problems causing poverty at over 3 times the rate we're funding solutions. So maybe not enough money is going to aid, but even the money that is going there is not well utilized. It fosters corruption. It removes accountability from developing nations, and it treats those nations and their peoples like charity cases, instead of empowering them with problem-solving approaches like entrepreneurship. In fact, of total official development assistance, only 2% globally went to entrepreneurship, and from the United States, a shameful 1%. The money that does go to development assistance largely funds paradigms that we use to drive the economic development of the global north. Centralized systems. A good example is hydroelectric dams, which we're tearing down in the global north because of their ecological damage. These are expensive to build, they're hard to maintain, they're prone to disasters, natural and human-made, and they're not resilient to climate change. Pictured here is Kariba Dam in Zambia, currently operating at 12% of its capacity due to drought. The Zambians have no water, they have no energy, and downstream, in lands that were formerly productive agricultural farms, there is no longer any food growing, so they have no food. They're worse off. What can be done? Distributed systems and social entrepreneurship are 2 hacks for poverty. And when we think about distributed systems, one thing that we can all relate to is mobile technology. 6.8 billion mobile subscriptions give more people on the planet access to mobile phones than to toilets. And social enterprises like M-Farm are providing fair market price information to smallholder farmers in Africa. Social enterprises like Meimei in Myanmar are providing healthcare information to expectant and new mothers. Mobile money in the global south is leapfrogging our centralized banking paradigm in the global north. And social enterprises like Inventure are using mobile transactions and big data to provide credit scores for the poor for the first time, including them in financial systems. So mobile and social entrepreneurship seem like pretty good hacks. But mobile won't solve everything. It won't give you water, it won't give you food, and there's no app for a crap. And you need energy to charge the phones. Fortunately, the decrease in cost of photovoltaic panels has led to a proliferation of solar-powered lanterns, solar home systems, and solar microgrids. These are sold and serviced by social enterprises like Solar Sister in Africa, Onergy in India, and Power Generation in Nepal, and Ilumexico in Mexico. Once families invest in these systems, they no longer have to buy kerosene, which costs them an average of $2 a week. And so payback periods can be as short as a few weeks to a few months. After that, they start investing the savings in things like sending girls to school, as well as boys. And women who sell and service these systems end up as nuclei for economic growth in their communities. Solar systems are reliable. They don't put out fumes. They don't put out greenhouse gases. And they're resilient to climate change. One might wonder, could the global north learn something from the global south? Why aren't we all using distributed solar systems? Enough sun reaches the surface of the planet every day to meet our power requirements in 2050 for 2 years. So we have plenty of energy reaching the planet. But as Pope Francis points out in Laudato Si', there is a need for adequate storage technologies. Tesla's $5 billion gigafactory will dramatically increase the supply of batteries, power packs for small businesses, and power walls for homes. Imagine if that $523 billion in fossil fuel subsidies was used for distributed solar storage instead. So, what about food? Well, the paradigm in the global north is monoculture, centralized agricultural production. This has led to a proliferation in the use of synthetic herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers. These chemicals run off into waterways, creating algal blooms. They reduce dramatically biodiversity, and we've had a loss of pollinators critical for food production all over the world. In addition to the negative environmental consequences, the public health impacts of monoculture are well documented. Increases in obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and some forms of cancer. But of course these are more productive, right? Well, no. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, smallholder farms produce more per unit of land than large centralized farms. And when they practice sustainable methods, they build the soil for future generations, they provide homes for pollinators, and they preserve biodiversity for other uses, like medicine. Social enterprises like Jehudi Kalimo provide these smallholder farmers credit so that they can invest in more productive assets, like cows that make 5 times as much milk with the same inputs. And social enterprises like Promethean Power Systems provide off-grid rapid milk chillers so that farmers can harvest the full economic value of their work. Of course, we all know that cows produce manure, and that manure produces methane, which is one of the primary greenhouse gases emitted, causing global warming. But fortunately, social enterprises like Sistema Biobolsa in Mexico have distributed waste-to-energy systems, circular models of production that convert this manure into natural gas for cooking and organic fertilizer that further increases the agricultural yield. You might imagine what would happen if the same paradigm was applied for human waste. There'd be clean toilets everywhere, competing for your excrement, regardless of your gender identity. So distributed systems and social entrepreneurship seem to be pretty good hacks for poverty. We need new approaches to solve poverty. The encyclical Laudato Si' issued in June, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals adopted in September call for essentially the same outcomes. From political, scientific, and spiritual perspectives, we hear a convergent message. The system is broken. It needs to be hacked. Pope Francis, I dare say, is a hacker. He calls all of us to take action. I hope you'll join us. Thank you.